Good afternoon and welcome to today's Milwaukee Press Club Newsmaker Luncheon. I want to welcome you all to the Newsroom Pub, and we're thrilled that today's event is being live streamed on the internet by Journal Communications and JS Online. The Journal Sentinel and Journal Communications are the sponsors for the Newsmaker Luncheon series, and without which the Press Club could not conduct it. Today's luncheon features pollsters and pundits. It's intended to take the political pulse of Wisconsin's November 4th election. And I'll begin by stating the obvious, that it's close, very close. The latest Rasmussen poll came out this morning showing Mary Burke in the governor's race leading Governor Walker by 1 percentage point. But the poll of all polls in Wisconsin, as we know, is the Charles Franklin Marquette Law School poll, and we're going to find out more about that in a moment. I'm going to introduce the panelists and our moderator, and then I'll get out of the way. On the end there, we have J.R. Ross, analyst and reporter for WisPolitics.com. We have the aforementioned pollster Charles Franklin from the Marquette Law School, and Craig Gilbert. He is the Washington Bureau Chief for the Journal Sentinel, and we just happened to hit it right that his schedule allowed him to be back in town today. And last but not least, here is columnist Dan Bice for the Journal Sentinel. Today's discussion will be moderated by Milwaukee Journal Sentinel editorial page editor David Haynes, and with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thanks much, Steve, and welcome to our panelists. And I want to thank all of you here at the Press Club and all of you watching at JS Online. I think it's going to be an interesting hour as we discuss what has become the hottest gubernatorial race in the country. I want to turn first to Charles Franklin. Charles, you're the pollster in the pollster and pundits part of this program. So can you give us a sense of where the election sits right now?
Well, am I supposed to use this? I'm sorry, I really don't know.
Hello? There you go.
Okay, there we go. Well, we kind of need Dan Rather to get an appropriate tight as an analogy here. Our last poll from 2 weeks ago now was 47-47 tie. That was down from a 5-point Walker lead 2 weeks earlier. But if you go through the last several polls, the leads have been 3 points for Walker, 1 point for Burke, 2 points for Burke, 3 points for Walker, 5 for Walker, and then a tie. Those are likely voters, and that's quite close, just a narrow range, and each change is pretty small, except for this 5-0, but even the shift from 5 points to 0 in the last two. But even that was Burke up by 2 and Walker down by 3, so that wasn't a large shift on either one of them. If you look at registered voters, which is not sensitive to enthusiasms and so on, that same series is a 0, a tie, a 1 point Walker, 3 point Walker, 0, 1 point Walker, 3 point Walker. So if you average across those, whether it's likely or registered voters, a very slight average advantage of Walker of about 1 to 1.5 points, well inside the 3.5 point margin of error that we typically have, and most importantly, no consistent trend. And the last thing is to simply compare it with 2010 and 2012 recall, where there was a consistent lead for Walker in both of those, and it was considerably bigger. So, for example, in our 2 polls in May before the recall, we had Walker up by 6 in the early May poll, and up by 7 in the final pre-election poll in late May. He won by 6.8. That was a pretty steady margin through that. So both the lack of a trend and the consistent closeness in our poll, but also in other polls, as we mentioned, certainly points to still a tight race, unless, of course, turnout breaks or people shift.
Hey, Craig, let me go to you real quick. There's a couple of new polls out today. Can you talk about those? Steve mentioned one, the Rasmussen poll, which I think a lot of people think tends to be conservative. There's another one, though, too, out today, right?
Yeah, the Rasmussen poll, which has Mary Burke up by 1, and Public Policy Polling, which is a Democratic firm which does a lot of public polling, is just the opposite, as Walker up by 1. And actually, so it's a little bit counterintuitive. I mean, Rasmussen you think of as being a little bit more Republican friendly, although that's been less true recently. And PPP, Democratic firm, has Walker up by 1. They're all telling the same story, which is kind of a jump ball. And to me, it's, it gets a little bit boring after a while, reporting on the same numbers, it's a close race, saying it over and over again, but it is awfully striking how evenly divided the state is and how fixed these trends are. I mean, it's like you look at the numbers in Charles's polling for registered voters, Walker approval, it's between, I think it's been between 47 and 49 for 3 years. I mean, it just never changes. These numbers are etched in stone. I mean, kind of that's where we are, that's where the electorate is. We're kind of a 50, we're a Democratic state in presidential elections, but we're kind of a 50-50 state in non-presidential elections. And so that's, we shouldn't be too shocked, even though Governor Walker is coming off a 6-point victory and a 7-point victory in his first, in those other 2 races. We shouldn't be too shocked that this race is more like a jump ball than those 2 races.
Dan Bice.
But there is a difference in the way the ads are going right now. If you just look at the ads, you have the most recent Scott Walker one is this very upbeat, positive 60-second ad that you would expect of someone who's comfortably ahead. On the other hand, you have the Mary Burke ad, the new one that has the John Doe stuff and attacks Walker on many points. That's the sort of ad that you would expect Tom Barrett to be running days before the election. So what do you think's going on? You have the polls saying that they're very, very close together, but the actions of the campaigns seem to tell a slightly different story.
Just quickly, my answer to that is I think because of the nature of the midterm electorate and because of what we know happened in 2010 and 2012, I think Republicans feel like they have a marginal advantage there because of who they think is going to turn out, because Republican base turns out more reliably than the Democratic base in midterm elections, and I think that gives them, in their minds, a small edge, but not big enough to really be that comfortable.
J.R. Ross from WisPolitics, you want to add to that?
One kind of interesting thing is if you look at national environment, we're seeing not necessarily a wave for Republicans, but a pretty good year for Republicans. For whatever reason, we're not seeing that same ripple tide, whatever you want to call it, in Wisconsin. And I've asked people about this, and it seems like it is locked in so much that it's a referendum on Walker. So yes, his ad is positive today, but he's still talking about 250,000 new jobs. So here we are 2 weeks out, he has not solved that issue. It's still a vulnerability for him. And so every time I cover an election, I always hear it's about turnout. Oh, it's about turnout, it's about turnout. A good example of that is 2006. Big Dem wave swept across Wisconsin. 2.16 million people voted in that race. 4 years later, in a huge Republican wave, 2.17 million voted. So it's not just turnout, but who turns out. So we're looking at this fall in Wisconsin is there are 2 paths for Mary Burke to win. One has been she can convince people who voted for Walker in 2010 and 2012 to say, you know what, I've changed my mind. I'm going to vote against this guy even though I went to polls for him twice. Or she can find that segment of 800,000 or so people who don't turn out in a presidential year, find the Democrats in that segment, and get them enthusiastic enough to turn out in November. The question is, has she done that, or can she done it in the last 2 weeks? And I don't think it's been answered yet.
So JR, let's stick with you for a second, then Charles jump in. But so what's a Walker path to victory look like?
The biggest knock I hear on the governor from Republicans is that he's been playing prevent defense since January. Essentially, back in January, we got these great revenue numbers. Republicans pushed through this tax package. They had a big income tax cut, changed polling tables, and Walker kind of figured, this is it, I've locked it up. She can't overtake me. It's going to be a good midterm environment. I've got this thing nailed down. So he's been basically playing 8 defensive backs for the last 8 months, trying not to give the touchdown pass because she's down by 5 points. She needs a good pass to win. He's trying to run out the clock. So I get the impression from Republicans that they're focusing on turnout, which you're always here. You see Walker going to all these field offices saying, I need you to go to your doors. Go get your neighbors, get your friends. It's close. He's very much sending the signal of, I am not taking this for granted in terms of my base. He needs the base to turn out. Get the base to turn out and not irritate that slim sliver in the middle that isn't sure about him, you notice he does not talk about abortion these days, doesn't want to talk about it at all, because he knows that's an issue that does not sit well with suburban women especially, who maybe voted for him before but aren't so sure this time. Also why you see Emily's List hitting him hard on that issue, because they believe that him opposing abortion in all cases does not sit well with those voters and may encourage them to vote. So for Walker, the path is, keep it safe, essentially. The problem is, by keeping it safe, he's not exciting the people he needs to excite in some ways. I mean, I've heard grumblings from anti-abortion folks of, he's not really kind of going to bat for us right now. What's going on? So will those folks who are big Walker supporters say, okay, I accept what he had to do to win, and I'll show up on November 4th anyway?
You want to go on to something else?
Can I
think Dan has a comment. Dan Bice.
It's an interesting thing that you're saying that his campaign has been so defensive. When I'm covering politicians, I tend to think of them in terms of those who play defense and those who play offense. And a governor like Jim Doyle played defense. He tried to avoid making mistakes, and that's classic Tom Barrett. Tom tries to avoid making any mistakes as mayor. Then you have the ones who play offense. And Tommy Thompson was very much one who wanted to go on offense. When you think he wants to do this, he wants to surprise you by doing even more. And Scott Walker did that right out of the gate. So he's been on offense, a very aggressive governor, but his campaign has been very passive. And his performance in the first debate was, I thought he coasted through the first debate. So it's an interesting analysis that he's run his campaign in a way that's very different from the way that he's run his administration.
So why do you think that is? I've been interested too that there have been so few fisticuffs in the debate at a time in a close election when you would think somebody ought to be out there trying to land punches. Or are they just waiting or letting the outside groups do that work for them?
I think with Burke there was concerns that she's never done this before, and so this is her first time, and they were just wanting to get her through the two debates without screwing up. And the first debate she appeared very rehearsed and like she had just gotten out of debating class and got up there and said what she needed to say. But in the second one she relaxed. But I think if you read what Scott Walker said, he is attacking on many points, but it's just not in his demeanor to go on the attack one-on-one. And the second debate was the first time he's ever gone into a debate where he's essentially tied or only 1 point up. In past debates, he's been up by 4, 5, 6, 7 points, and he's been allowed to play it very safe.
Craig, any thoughts on either of the strategies, either Burke's or Walker's?
I do think what Dan said is true about, you have really a novice politician in Mary Burke. That's dictated a lot of this. One of the great advantages Scott Walker has had in this election is that he's somebody who has breathed politics 24/7 for a very long time. He's somebody who's very comfortable with the media. He's a part-time pundit. He loves politics. He loves policy. Those are all strengths in a political candidate. People that like doing it, are comfortable doing it, think about it all the time, that makes you a better candidate. She's somebody that's never done this before. So that's chalk that up as an important advantage throughout this campaign for Scott Walker. And also, how we're going to look back on all this and have to ask ourselves the question when it's all said and done is, how much did the campaign really matter? Because I think the premise of a lot of our discussion, the level of division in the state, the degree to which the state is evenly divided, how entrenched public opinion is about Scott Walker, if you were to kind of create or imagine a set of conditions in which the impact of the campaign would be really, really marginal, this would be it. Because we know how the state behaves in presidential elections, we know how it behaves in midterms. It's not that it doesn't matter, it's just that it's going to matter within a very narrow range. It could matter just enough to tip things if it's a close election. But I don't think in the end, all the even campaign spending. That's been one of the surprises in the campaign is how even, at least on the broadcast side, the television ad spending has been a big difference from the recall. It's very hard to win the ad wars when the other side's spending almost as much money as you are.
And Craig's perspective is what historians refer to as the longue durée, the grand perspective. But you can see that small things do matter in this race. The plagiarism, whether it's plagiarism or not, scandal, clearly she lost momentum, and Burke seemed to fall behind as a result of that. And part of it was they didn't know how to respond. And Burke acknowledges this now, that they didn't think it was a serious thing. And at that point, they were fairly even, and then she slips behind by several points. So the fact that it's so close, some minor things can tip things one direction or another. I'm not sure why it's now back to even, but clearly she's been able to regain some of the ground that she lost. But these things do have an impact because things are so close.
Hey, Charles, let's go to you for a second. Have you seen any impact in polling so far from the debates?
No, not from the debates. We were in the field in the middle of the first debate, and it's not unusual at all to see no particular movement in the poll. About 8% more said that they thought Walker had done better in that first debate, but because it was such a small sample of post-debate viewers, that was really at the margin of error, which was 9 points for just debate viewers. So not much evidence, and more importantly, not a discernible shift in the vote when you did a statistical model of people post-debate versus pre. But I think on the debate side, think of the issues that were raised in that then became part of the story the rest of the week. That was both we have a work problem, not a jobs problem, which became a bit of an issue. And it also, I think, had ramifications in the minimum wage comments at the Ed Board meeting. So I think there were ramifications from the debate that aren't shown in just an instant movement of public opinion.
Jared,
but I'm sorry, I want to push on one thing.
Yeah.
Well, two things really. So we do say turnout.
That's right.
But JR also made the right point. It's not the level of turnout, it's who turns out. And that's where our data is showing more fluctuation, and the fluctuation is not among partisans. That's Craig's point as well. 96% of Republicans for Walker, 94% of Democrats for Burke, and that hadn't moved for 6 months. And their turnout rates haven't moved very much over the last few polls, a little bit, but not much. So that's not going to drive anything, but it leaves the independents, and my favorite group, the independents who are also moderates, who make up 17% of likely voters, and who tune in later, pay less attention, are often less motivated, but might be motivated. So that, to me, is the uncertainty of where this last one is. On the issue of the campaigns, though, and their appeals, I wanted to go ahead and get this out. It's striking how evenly the two candidates' favorability ratings compare. So in this last poll, and for registered voters, it's Walker 48 favorable, 48 unfavorable. For Burke, it's 40 favorable, 43 unfavorable, but still 17% as of a week ago, 2 weeks ago now, didn't know enough about her to have an opinion. Compare that with the Baldwin-Thompson race. At the end of the campaign, it was Baldwin 36 favorable, 44 unfavorable. And for Thompson, it was 37 favorable, 51 unfavorable. If you look at the recall, it was Walker 51-46, a much better net positive, and it was Barrett 42-47, underwater on that. So it's interesting that for all of the campaigning this year, actually neither candidate has driven the other deep underwater. And actually for likely voters last week, it was Burke 44-44 with likelies. So there's just not much evidence that the damage to the other side has taken place this campaign the way it did successfully for Walker in the recall, and successfully for Baldwin only in the sense that she was even less underwater than Thompson was.
So it might really be a campaign that didn't matter that much. JR?
I just want to add to what Dan's saying about the plagiarism stuff. It kind of illustrates 2 points. One, the Walker playing defense. If you look at the debates, the first debate, he did not mention anything about our jobs report. Didn't hit on that issue at all. And the second one he brought up, but didn't mention the P word. which seems like, well, why wouldn't you do that? That's an obvious attack. I get complaints from Republicans of that was an issue that if they'd seized upon it properly on day one, they could have sunk her campaign right then and there. But they didn't. She bounced back. So well, I should also say at the caveat, I've learned in covering politics 2 things. 1, I'll never run a campaign because I don't know how to do it. And 2, everybody second guesses everybody else. So take what I tell you with a grain of salt. There's other folks who are not part of the Walker campaign, but that was a prime opportunity for Walker to really put some distance. With Burke, her ability to bounce back suggests this is really truly a referendum on Scott Walker. It's not about Mary Burke. As long as she crosses the viability threshold of, okay, she could be governor, I can accept that, that's enough for her to win if people don't go out for Walker. The second thing is her response to the question, how do you find plagiarism? Probably one of her rougher moments in the campaign, illustrates what a novice she has been at being a candidate. Now, I'm not going to judge because God knows I would not be able to think on my feet that way about all these issues first time out in a statewide race. But it's a sign of how your campaign, sometimes your staff doesn't prepare you for everything. If Scott Walker asked that question, he would sidestep it in a heartbeat and not even bat an eye. But Mary Burke was caught off guard, stumbled, made a great TV ad for Scott Walker, and again hurts her ability to cross that threshold and be liable. It reminded me of 2006 when Kathleen Falk ran against Peg Schlager in the AG primary. The question was posed, have you ever driven drunk before? And Falk stammered about that. It's like, look, if you're going to challenge her in a race because she drove drunk, you have to answer that question. So it's a good thing example of your staffs do matter in these campaigns and how they prep you matters a whole lot.
Can I just add one thing to that? Charles, that was a great point to bring up the Thompson-Baldwin race because, normally you think of better known candidates, it's sort of harder to move their numbers because people are familiar with them, they already have a lot of information about them. Lesser known candidates, you can really move the needle on them because people don't have any information on them. When you look at Tommy Thompson, longest serving governor in Wisconsin history, pretty well-known guy, what happened to him in the course of that campaign? He got pummeled and his numbers got worse and worse. He started out up here and he went down here, his negatives went way up. Then you compare that to Mary Burke, a total unknown. And as she's become better known, her favorables and unfavorables have basically offset each other. As her name ID goes from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50, her faves, unfaves are like even Steven the whole way up. And so in a way, it's almost like she kind of inherited the polarization over Scott Walker because she's running against Scott Walker. There's just, she's been a kind of a 50-50 figure throughout this campaign as a nobody and now as a somebody.
There was something unique about the Thompson race, though, and that is he went off the air. He ran out of money after the primary. She was able to come in with a great ad strategy of the Tommy Thompson you voted for before, he's no longer that guy. So she was able to redefine him in a way that they haven't been able to do with Burke because she's been matching.
But not early on.
Not early on.
Early on, she was outspent, and it didn't really seem to hurt her that much.
You can talk when you have the mic.
Wait a minute. I think Ronald Reagan used that line once.
I wanted to say, I wanted to follow up on JR's point. There have been 3 times that Mary Burke has been unable to answer a question. There was the situation where she was asked, where do you disagree with Obama? And how long was that? How many seconds? It was like a 12-second delay where she couldn't say anything. And then there's the interesting one at the debate where she's asked to say something favorable about the governor, and she seems to blank. And she's even given the mic first, and then it goes to him, and then she's got time to think about it. And I thought this was a case where she wasn't prepped properly, and in fact, I even tweeted something to that effect. But then when she came and talked to our edit board, it became clear that as a novice candidate, she was seriously thinking about saying something that she shouldn't have said, and that is that she doesn't like him and doesn't want to say anything nice about him. That's basically what she told us at the edit board. She said, I'm not going to do this politically correct thing and say something about somebody that I don't believe sincerely. So actually, when you see her not able to answer the question, she's actually calculating, should I say I've got nothing good to say about this guy and I'm not going to do it? So it was when we heard that, she starts off with us and answers, she gives two things that she likes about him, and then she stops and says, I'm not going to do this anymore. So, I mean, it's just a funny thing that she's been told how to answer this, but in that particular instance, she's seriously considered doing something that, I mean, it would have been the most dramatic moment of the debate had she done something like that.
Should I raise my hand to talk next?
JR.
I just have to tell you a quick funny story about the Thompson-Baldwin race. My 9-year-old son was 7 at the time, very bright young man. I'm watching TV in October. He walks in the room and sees a Tommy Thompson ad. He goes, "Oh, Daddy, he's not for you anymore." And when you're stuck in the middle of a campaign in the weeds, like sometimes you're very foggy, you let him sleep. I should have known that minute she was going to win, because that message sunk through with a 7-year-old that he got at the time about that ad. And now, with defining Burke, it reminds me very much of 2010 with Feingold and Johnson. Johnson was a novice politician from the private sector. Remember Russ Feingold's first TV ad? It was the oil slick in the Gulf Coast being taken up to Lake Michigan. No offense to Russ Feingold, who had great ads for a long time. That ad was very, very poorly done. And it showed they didn't know what to do. This guy had no record. They knew nothing about him. So how do you define a guy who has gotten a record? The same problem Mary Burke for a long time, for Walker, and he still struggled at times with this. She doesn't have a record. It's not like running against, a sitting lawmaker who's got all these votes.
Well, except JR, wait a minute. She worked for Jim Doyle. She was part of the Doyle administration.
Different here,
Why
though,
did
right?
Early on they go after that angle, which works at least for Republicans?
Oh, and they've been hitting it hard. I mean, Jim Doyle, I've asked this question to Republicans several times. Is Jim Doyle really that big of a deal 4 years later? And their answer is this. He's not very popular, and he drives the base. Jim Doyle and Barack Obama are the boogeymen for Wisconsin Republicans. You'll hear about them a lot for the next 2 weeks because they believe in a base-on-base election, it turns out they're core supporters. They do not want Jim Doyle to come back. They'll turn out to vote against Jim Doyle and Burke. And oh, by the way, it worked really well for Barack Obama in 2008. Now, the difference was that McCain was right after, Bush was still in office. So now you have a gap of 3.5 years, but they still think it's going to work. Or it'll help at least.
Can I stick with you, JR, for a minute? I'd like to hear some other comments on this, too. I'm curious what you think about the debate format for these two debates. Not a lot of interaction between the candidates.
I sometimes begrudgingly like the 5-minute open mic session where you ask whatever you want to, because it prompts them to think on their feet and really engage each other. It's also, though, sometimes like listening to fingernails on chalk because they're not very good at it. So that's the only format that I've seen, other than having two of them at a table, with Goucher's done a few times, and like peppering them back and forth. I mean, if we had an ability to do that more often, that would probably be better. But if you have a panel discussion, sometimes it's hard to kind of pin somebody down. And where's that line of, I'm not asking you a question to be specific, but I'm badgering you? I mean, we all face that line as journalists of, well, not you, Charles, but as journalists of, you have to be unbiased and ask a fair question. So, there's that line you kind of try and dance sometimes.
So we're too nice.
Sometimes.
My main criticism of the second debate was that you had 4 white males doing all of the questioning. And of course.
Right.
So, but the format, I wasn't a fan of the second one at all. The questions, I mean, the candidates were engaged and had a lot to say, but the questions didn't really get to that. The first one I thought worked pretty well, but I love the Goucher format,
yeah.
And that's the format. It's unfortunate that they're not doing that. Again, I thought, I rewatched the 2010, 2012 debates. It's what I do for fun, and you I mean, it was very interesting to see just how much better Walker is today than he was in early 2010, because the answers then are very clipped, and he's addressing, like trying to get out of each question as quickly as possible. Whereas now, I was wondering in the first one if he's just going to start wandering around the stage because he was so comfortable with everybody. But the best debate were the ones with Goucher in them compared to the others.
Can I just add something to that? We did a debate, the Journal Sentinel in 2004 in the Democratic presidential primary. John Kerry and Howard Dean and John Edwards. And I learned something I'd never forgotten about debates. We had somebody, we were involved in the planning of the debate, and the person who had expertise in this came in and said, look, what the debate looks like and what it sounds like is a function of one thing. It's not the rules you give them. It's not whether you tell them they can interrupt each other. It's not, all it is are they sitting or standing, and how many feet apart are they? And if they're standing and the farther apart they are, the more stilted the debate's going to be. If they're sitting and the closer together they are, the more freewheeling it's going to be. And so it was just sort of, these things depends on how they're sort of staged and choreographed, because that influences the psychology of the candidates and how free they are to kind of mix it up.
Hey, Charles, I want to turn to polling for a minute and ask you a question about sort of in general about polling. Do polls necessarily get more accurate the closer we get to Election Day? And as a casual observer, how should we look at the polls? Should we be focused at this point in the cycle on likely voters or registered voters?
Sure. So in the aggregate across all polling, yes, it gets more accurate. Both 538 and Pollster.com have some posts on this if you want to track it down. But it's a pretty noticeable improvement from pre-Labor Day, smoothly getting closer on average again as we get close. That's not infallible, and certainly for individual polls, it's less predictable than for the average across a lot of polls. That's also why it would be helpful to have more polls in the average by more different pollsters. Here we're down to about 3 or 4, maybe 5 active pollsters in the state, and so it'd be nice if we had more than that. So it works better if you've got national data or a presidential race where there are a whole lot of pollsters involved. Still, the averages are pretty accurate, and especially in the last week or so. On the likely voter issue, there's one simple thing and then there's one a little more esoteric. The simple thing is turnout does matter, and who's going to turn out matters. The problem is, do people really know if they're likely to vote or not? And work by some political scientists at Columbia have shown very nicely that likely voters don't clearly identify themselves, don't accurately identify themselves in the spring and summer, which is why our polling has tended to emphasize registered voters prior to Labor Day. From Labor Day on, again, this Columbia research shows that the likely voter sample gets better and better as you come closer to Election Day, as people are more set. But there's not a magic date at which afterwards it's accurate and before it's not. And there's not a magic date at which people have completely crystallized into likely or not. And so, what I said earlier at the beginning, there's more variability in our likely voter data than there is in our registered voter data. And it's the same original population of registered voters. So the variability is coming not from preferences being different, but because turnout is different and enthusiasm has moved back and forth. If we had a 7-point race now, you would hardly notice because we're looking at modest shifts. But because the race is so tight, those enthusiasm differences show up as one of the elements that's moving things. So I'd still take a likely voter estimate now. The one subtle thing, and this will come out, I'm sure, or if it hasn't already, is between the side of pollsters, and this is especially true of campaign pollsters, that develop an explicit model of what they think the electorate will be. So those who say it's going to be 2.1 million turnout like it was in 2010, and we think this is going to be the demographic composition of that electorate, and they're not just making it up, it's based on data from those previous elections, but it's still a judgment call that it's going to look like the 2010 or the 2006 electorate, for example. And that has a rich tradition in campaign polling and some others, versus the approach that we take, which is to ask people, are you certain you're going to vote, and take them at their word. So the difference between these two is people might not know, people might shift, and that's a downside to ours. But if you have a fixed model of the electorate, then you won't pick up rises and falls in the short term that are campaign specific. So our approach did well in 2012, so we're certainly not going to change it if it did well back then. But more importantly, if you look at our likely voter sample, demographically, it does look pretty close to the combination of the 2006 and the 2010 electorates combined, sort of splitting the difference between a Dem win and a Rep win. And honestly, there's not much demographic difference between the two anyway. And so the self-identification of if you're likely or not that we prefer is producing profiles of the likely electorate that aren't very far from what you would get if you had an a priori model, which the campaigns typically tend to prefer. So there's a plus and minus to both.
Okay, Dan Bice wants to jump in. And Charles, you're in the field for one more poll, as I understand it, which we'll know about a week from today.
A week from today,
okay.
In the field this weekend.
All right. Dan Bice.
Actually, I have a question. I just have a question for you. We were talking about the Thompson-Baldwin race, and it was in the last 10 days where the Thompson campaign tried to raise some issues about her votes on Iraq, where she was in the uncomfortable position of being the only person to vote with Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul on some issues. But it seemed like those things came up too late. They didn't have an impact on the race. In the current race, is there going to be a point at which it's too late to bring up issues like this where people have crystallized? And when would that be, do you think? Do you have any sense?
May? Because I believe Craig and we're really polarized. You know, a surprise issue that really resonates, holds true, could conceivably do something. It's just, well, I guess if it's surprising, there's a reason why we wouldn't anticipate it. But mostly you end up with things that were anticipated or could be anticipated beforehand. So in this example from the Senate race, Thompson campaign had run the argument that she's too liberal for Wisconsin for a long time. So bringing up those specific votes to try and reinforce that argument wasn't quite so new and suddenly surprising. This is where, you know, a mistake in a debate could raise some vulnerability that rang true. But I think, especially with an incumbent seeking re-election, arguably a third re-election, we're also in the position where the brand new issue seems unlikely to turn up. You know, if those emails yesterday had had some amazing smoking gun, yeah, maybe that could have been a kind of shocking new development, but usually we don't see those. Last thing is, it takes time for these to sink in with voters. You know, look, 75% don't know who Brad Schimmel is, 72% don't know who Susan Happ is. You know, on the other hand, when the Supreme Court stepped in and changed the photo ID, we went from 82% thinking a photo ID was required on Thursday's sample, to 62% knowing it was not required on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday sample. So it actually is possible to assimilate news quickly, but you see it doesn't work with the two attorney general candidates the way it did for this very prominent, very salient news story with a very clear and cleanly defined starting point.
J.R. Ross, let me move to you. You raised something earlier that I'd like both you and Craig to talk about. To what extent do the national elections this year, the midterms, affect the state race?
Well, what's different for us this year is there's no federal race on the ballot, or at least no race of interest. There's no U.S. Senate race. So it's kind of a little bit tougher in some ways to kind of get that national environment. Now, Walker's people obviously been talking about Barack Obama, and they're going to use the president's visit here, I think, next week to try and jazz the base again. But it's harder in Wisconsin when you don't have a national race on the federal race on the ballot to kind of make that argument. Plus the House races, I mean, none of them are competitive. So it's a little bit different here. Maybe that's part of why we're not seeing the same environment that we're seeing elsewhere. I mean, it's all a theory, but it's one possibility.
Just a couple of points about that. I think, is it good for Scott Walker that Barack Obama's approval ratings have declined? Yes. But how significant is that? I mean, in a state where, for example, Obama's numbers aren't as bad here as they are in other places. And, you know, the relationship between, I mean, the irony is that 2 years ago, you know, President Obama was doing much better and Scott Walker had an easier time. And now, I'm not saying there's correlation here, but now President Obama's not doing so well and Scott Walker's in a tighter race, which sort of suggests something about the relationship. people have such strong feelings about the governor. Those feelings are less susceptible to be influenced by their feelings about the president. The feelings about the president could be a turnout factor. But one interesting other thing about this cycle is we've talked about the fact that, Democrats are in danger of losing their Senate majority. There's lots of Democrats in big trouble in different states. But there are Republican governors that are in trouble. And the biggest driver of that is you had a lot of Democrats elected to the Senate from red and purple states in 2008, 6 years ago, which was a really good Democratic year. And you have all these Republican governors elected in purple and blue states 4 years ago, 2010, which was a really good Republican year. So you had Democrats kind of overperforming 6 years ago in the Senate, and Republicans overperforming 4 years ago for governor, and now they're kind of coming back down to earth a little bit.
One thing with the president coming, he's coming to Milwaukee for a reason. He's not going to Rhinelander or Wausau or Eau Claire or La Crosse, because Democrats have problems with drop-off voting in midterm elections. They have problems with the African-American community in midterm elections. Barack Obama is coming here to help boost black turnout in Milwaukee. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Michelle Obama came for the same reason, also appeal to female voters, went to Madison to talk to college kids. Another huge drop-off for Democrats in midterm elections. So these people, while the president, for example, his numbers are a little bit upside down in the last Marquette poll, still personally 51%, it's not a bad place to be necessarily for a guy in office for 6 years, right? So there's some personal appeal, and they're appealing to a certain segment of the voting population to get them out on election day.
Yeah. According to the new Rasmussen poll today, if I read it correctly, Barack Obama's approval rating in Wisconsin was 51%, which I don't think I believe, but it's still pretty interesting. Right. If it's 51%, that suggests it's not too terrible. And just on the point of Milwaukee turnout, it's right to say it's not just how many people turn out, it's who turns out, of course. But again, the size of the turnout, here's one example where it matters. Democrats have been winning the city of Milwaukee by about 150,000 votes in these last two presidential elections on average. They've been winning the city of Milwaukee by about 100,000 votes in these governor's races. It's the same shares. There's no swing. It's like 75-25 no matter which election you talk about. But the turnout is so much higher in presidential races that the impact of the city of Milwaukee is that much bigger in presidential races than gubernatorial races for Democrats.
So, Craig, you've written in the past that ticket splitting is a lost art in Wisconsin. What does that mean for the AG's race? Are they joined at the hip with the gubernatorial candidates?
That's a great question. I don't know what. When Charles talking about 25% name ID, it's really hard to handicap a race where nobody knows who the candidates are, which does make you think, there's a limit to how much, if these two races are super close, you can imagine one going one way and the other going the other way, but they would have to be really, really close because they're not going to deviate that much. Look at the last couple of election cycles. There was almost no difference in Baldwin-Thompson for Senate and Obama-Romney for president. There was almost no difference in 2010 between Johnson-Feingold for Senate and Walker-Barrett for governor. These top of the ticket races that's a little less true in the case of the AG, but it's the number 2 race on the ticket, so it's hard to imagine them being too different.
JR.
I was going to say, 2 races will help illustrate if there's still ticket splitting in Wisconsin. One, the AG race. I've heard the theory that it's going to be a total coattail race because they're not well known. Right. Now, the attack ads are starting. The Committee for Justice and Fairness is up against Brad Schimmel, Greater Wisconsin. One of their arms is going after Schimmel as well. That starting WMC is up. So they'll get better known the next 2 weeks. But the theory is either A, it's going to be a straight coattail vote, or if you're voting for Walker, you're not sure about him, you might check Happ as a check, if you will, on the governor, and vice versa. So watch that. 2, the 17th Senate District down southwestern Wisconsin. Mary Burke should do very well down there. If Howard Markline can go against that tide, that will show you there are still pockets at least. Now, Howard Markline has raised a ton more money than Pat Baumack has, so don't discount that. But he fought against the tide in 2012 in his assembly district. Barack Obama won it by 59% of the vote, and he won 52%, something like that. So there are pockets, but statewide races, it's tougher to see anymore.
On the coattail versus balancing, it just proves that for every theory, there's an equal and opposite plausible theory.
One other question, then we'll open it up to our audience to ask a few questions. Dan, did you want to jump in on that first?
I was just going to say it's interesting with the dual theories. When I was coming in, there was a prominent Democrat who was wanting to make a bet with me as to who would get the most votes, Happ or Burke, and he was taking Happ. So there is a coattail effect, but there could be other things going on as well with people being more comfortable voting for her.
And a question, Dan, you can take it if you want to begin with. I wonder how much Governor Walker's supposed presidential ambitions matter in this race. He hasn't been super clear about whether he will serve out his full 4-year term.
My guess, I would think that it would be hard to believe that someone would vote just on that issue. But it has been interesting that he's moved from not answering the question to now saying it's his goal to serve 4 years. But I can't imagine someone saying, I'm not going to vote for him because he might not. I mean, and you know, he would have to win for him to leave here. So I just don't think it'd probably be much of a factor.
Okay. Let's open it up. Questions? Marilyn Krause.
JR, you were making a point about the high profile.
By the way, I'll repeat the question for our viewers at JS Online.
The high profile visits for Mary Burke. You've had Michelle Obama twice. The president's coming. Bill Clinton's coming this week.
Yes.
You've had, unless I missed something, one brief visit by Chris Christie for Walker. Do those high profile visits really help the candidate as well as drive turnout? And why do you think we're not seeing that on the Republican side?
So the question is, do visits by surrogates like Chris Christie and Michelle Obama help drive turnout or help the candidates in other ways?
Well, don't forget Sharon Day was here the other day. I think some Republicans wish they could forget she was here, talking about how we're not so sharp. But they're often good if you can capture that enthusiasm and take them right down to City Hall and vote. It helps. It's free media coverage. That helps. You know, money is finite in politics. People think there's like this unlimited source of money in politics, but there is a limit. You only raise so much money because there are other races going on. It's free media. That helps. You know, you might engage somebody, you might otherwise not be engaged. So yeah, they do help. Now Walker, in a Washington Post story like just a couple days ago, said, I don't want surrogates. This is about me. I don't need that. I need the RGA's money though, but I don't need the surrogates because he gets people to turn out for him. You know, there's that group. Let's face it. My wife, who doesn't like politics, and we have a rule at home that if it takes more than 60 seconds, I can't talk to her about it at the dinner table. She's not going to a rally for anybody. So the casual voter, they're not reaching those folks with those rallies. They're not really getting them to come out and do that stuff. So it's more about free media attention, getting your people jazzed up, because again, it's also about who's going to go make that call on Saturday afternoon. I'm not going to watch a Badger game. I'm going to go sit in some office in La Crosse and make phone calls all day long to people. I'm going to put a yard sign out. I'm going to knock on doors. I mean, it's all kinds of like little pieces of like the puzzle for a campaign.
Anybody else? Just a quick follow on that. Why not bring Bill Clinton in if you're the Democratic candidate? Has anyone heard any possibility?
You mean Hillary?
Is he coming?
Yeah.
Bill's coming Friday. Do you mean Hillary?
No, I meant Bill.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know
it was a
that.
good question. Why isn't Hillary here?
All right, very good. And other questions from the audience? Yes?
This is a question for Charles, but for other people too. The Supreme Court's decision not to take out the marriage for gay couples, did that help Walker with these independent voters who you mentioned that you guys were talking about abortion? I would be clear about that. It hasn't been talking about abortion, those things that these independent voters, maybe especially females, care about.
So the question is, how did the gay marriage decision, the Supreme Court's decision to forego deciding that for now, affect the race, if at all?
Yeah. Well, we didn't see a direct shift in vote, but there was a sharp change in opinion about same-sex marriage. In May, before the district court ruled, and obviously before the Supreme Court, 53% supported same-sex marriage. Right after the Supreme Court decision, it's 63%. So that's by far the biggest, whatever months that was, 5-month shift in opinion we've seen. We've seen, like the whole country, a gradual rise in support for marriage from was way down in the high 30s to now in the low to mid 50s nationally. You saw the same, but we don't have data here going back as far, but you've seen it rise. And now that 53 to 63 bump is pretty high. But I think the fact is more seen in the governor's reluctance to express his opinion about same-sex marriage, to say, well, it's decided, it's not up to me anymore. So to the extent that it takes that issue off the table, such as it is, I suppose you could see that as a plus. But there are about 4 or 5 issues that we track where the governor's clearly on the wrong side of majority opinion, and then there are several where it's Burke that's clearly on the wrong side of opinion. So I think that's maybe the other thing that's lurking here, is that opinion is not lopsidedly pro-Republican or lopsidedly pro-Democratic across the whole spectrum of issues, which, as the governor keeps pointing out, saliency matters. I don't think people care about that issue. Why do you keep asking me about it, Bice? I do think that's right in its fundamentals, that we are divided across different issues. If this race was decided only on minimum wage, Burke would win in a landslide. If it was decided only on photo ID or drug testing, then Walker would be advantaged.
Yeah, one illustration of that is that in 2006, Jim Doyle won a comfortable re-election for governor on a ballot in which by 19 or 20 points, Wisconsin voters voted to ban same-sex marriage. So, we're talking about an issue in which, as Charles noted, public opinion has changed so quickly that there's a lot of voters that are in the position of having a position today which was the opposite of their position 2 years ago or 6 months ago. So in that sense, it's hard to imagine it having a profound impact on the horse race.
Whereas on the abortion issue, it was interesting how quickly Walker responded to the first ads on that issue. Clearly they were anticipating it. Clearly they were concerned that it might have an impact. And so he immediately tries to reframe the issue to shift it his way. And there was concern on the other side that he might have been successful, so there's an immediate response to his response. You've had that a couple of times with job issues, and it took a while, but they did it also on plagiarism. But the abortion one was the one where there was a dramatic and immediate response to that. I wanted to ask you guys a question. We kept on shifting about these permanent trends and stuff. There'd be lots of variables, but how hard do you think it would be for Walker to win if he was running in a presidential year?
Really hard. I mean, we haven't voted Republican for president since Ronald Reagan. And what you see, and some of those races have been close. So, keep that in mind. It's not like it's physically impossible for a Republican to win a presidential race in Wisconsin. I mean, obviously, George W. Bush came really, really close twice. But what you've seen since those 2 elections with the Obama victories, and maybe this is more unique to Obama, but Democrats have certainly learned how to mobilize their voters. The urban landslides that Democrats are getting out of Milwaukee and Madison in presidential races are so big that it's extremely difficult for Republicans to find enough votes elsewhere in the state, in the less populous parts of the state, to kind of compensate for that. So there is just a real structural advantage for Democrats in presidential races that's hard to overcome right now because of the big places, the populous places, the large cities, and even the mid-sized cities have become democratic enough that when all those people are mobilized and turning out like they've been in presidential races, it's really hard for the Republicans to match that. And Republicans, I know a lot of Republicans that have become really pessimistic about their ability to win this state in a presidential race. Now, obviously, Governor Walker would be a different story because he's a hometown guy, but people tend to vote in presidential races. They really vote party. I mean, if you think they don't in other races, they really do in presidential races.
Anybody else? Other questions? Well, I have one more. Oh, Marilyn, you want to jump in?
So for each campaign, the time that's left, what does each campaign have to do to win?
Question is, what does each campaign have to do in the time that's left?
Well, what's going to change the next 2 weeks? I mean, that's kind of the biggest question I have. And let's just say that all three polls we've seen last week are true, and it's dead on even. I've always heard the rule of thumb that undecideds break against the incumbent sometimes 2-1. So if they're dead even right now, and they're dead even all the way through to election day, you would think that would help Burke. But we're in a different time than what I'm used to, so the rules of thumb that I was given early in my career don't always apply right now. So for both of them, it's about getting your base out. I mean, we say that over and over again, but it's more true now, especially in a midterm election. So can they get people excited? And is there anything that in the last 2 weeks, all of a sudden somebody goes, you know what, I can't accept that anymore. Remember, I was in kindergarten, or first grade, but 1980, Reagan, Carter. Carter was winning until, 2 weeks out? Something like that. All of a sudden, Ronald Reagan passed that viability test. And they said, okay, I can see him as president, and he won big. So could something like that happen here? Maybe, but I don't think so because we're so hardened. I mean, honestly, if there were a ham sandwich on the ballot against Scott Walker, it would get 45% of the vote half the time. I mean, that's because that segment of the population so dislikes him. And he could run against Jesus, Buddha, and Allah all in one, and he'd only get 48% for sure, because that vote will vote for him no matter what, because they love that guy. It's a really odd dynamic in Wisconsin that they're so locked into this kind of like rigid number. The guy does not have it. There's almost nobody who goes, he's okay, you know?
I guess I would say stick to fundamentals rather than try some dramatic Hail Mary pass either way. One of those fundamentals is turnout. 18 to 29-year-olds are 15.9% of registered voters. They're typically 10 or 11% of actual voters on election day. That's an important element. We've already talked about turnout in the city, and that's a part of that. The other is there's some evidence that campaigns that try a lot of different appeals, different issues that they raise, actually end up confusing voters a little more about their candidates' positions rather than sticking to a smaller number of issue appeals. So this is sort of relevant to the question of a last-minute surprise ad or a shift of direction. It may bring up something that you think suddenly becomes more relevant and might be more effective, but at least looking at Senate data from the 80s and 90s is what I'm referring to. It actually looks like the more different issue appeals you use, the less able voters are to know where you stand. So I think fundamentals go with what brought you here and hope that it works out for the best.
Just a couple of thoughts on sort of turnout and swings. If you took all the voters in Wisconsin that just vote all the time in every election, that would be a Republican-leaning group. I mean, those are the only people that voted, Republicans would win a lot of elections. If you took the people that voted most of the time, then that would be a pretty competitive but a slightly Democratic-leaning group. And if you took the people that vote in only presidential elections, but rarely or occasionally in non-presidential elections, that would be a very Democratic-leaning group. So that sort of gives you one way of looking at the turnout challenge and opportunity for Democrats, because they have a lot of room to grow their vote, but it's harder to do. The other thing I'm going to be looking at on election night, aside from that, is Scott Walker. Just one of the reasons we pay so much attention to this massive, incredible, gigantic turnouts in the suburbs, places like Brookfield, places in Waukesha County and Washington County that are just sort of lights out and that are really important for Scott Walker, obviously. But a big ingredient in his victory in 2012 and to some degree also in 2010 was he did really well with rural voters. He did really well outstate, better than Republicans often do. And so one big question is, can he replicate that? I mean, it would be hard to imagine him duplicating his performance in some of those markets, the ones he had in 2012. I think he was helped by running against the mayor of Milwaukee. He was helped by reservations about the recall process in certain parts of the state. But if he can come close to duplicating that performance, he's going to be extremely difficult to beat. Democrats, Wisconsin's a state, it's like a third rural, and it's a state where Democrats have to be competitive with rural voters to win. I mean, they can't just rely on these big turnouts in Milwaukee and Madison. They have to do more than that. And And they do well when they're competitive with rural voters like Barack Obama was. So I think Mary Burke certainly needs to do better with rural voters than Tom Barrett did, but she has a chance to do that partly because she's not the mayor of Milwaukee.
And Dan, we have about 1 minute.
First of all, I'll give you a tip on election night, something to watch for that many of the people here are going to watch, and that is how many people actually vote. In the recall election, it was 2.4 million. Is that 2.2? The lower it is, 2.5, the lower it is, the better it is for Republicans. The higher it is, the better it is for Democrats in general. Republicans are hoping like 2.2, 2.3. The Democrats are hoping for something close to what it was last time. One other thing that has been interesting to me is that every election, I believe there's a gag reflex that people have in response to a number of ads that are going on. And in the recall, almost every friend I had were saying, I can't take one more ad. I haven't had very many people do that at all this time. I mean, it's funny how we're not quite inundated like last time. And I wonder a little bit about how Act 10 plays in that. WEAC has been completely absent from this, and so have a number of other groups. Some groups are given to Greater Wisconsin, but I don't have the sense that I did in June of 2012 that everybody was overwhelmed by the race and wanted it to be over. And I'm the only one who says I want more TV ads. But it's just funny that I'm not getting that sort of reaction this time. Maybe in 2 weeks people will feel that way, but not right now.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank everyone here at the Milwaukee Press Club for joining us today for this panel. Let's thank our panelists. And thanks to everyone at JS Online.